is Mateusz. My surname is hard even for Polish people. Here are my social media, let's say, more programmer related. And regarding GitHub, it's worth remembering these two links. First is the link to slides. So what I'm presenting is actually online. You can enter this page whenever you like and just use it as a reference material. Some pictures, some red texts are links to other things, so it's worth remembering this one as a group for all the other links. Then as a grouping tool for all the other links. And then there is that repository, code repository, mat3e, 3pix-DDD, and this is the code I will show in the later part of the presentation. I work in Growth Cluster, acquisition group in WoW team. We are doing URL service, and we are trying a bit of this domain-driven design and clean architecture as well. I have some courses on Udemy, also including architecture. Most of them are in Polish currently, and I also have some part-time activities, but it's not a presentation about myself. Domain-driven design, just quickly skimming through the topic, I will remind some basic terms, and then I will show how to convert these terms into the code. I would like to focus more on the code in this presentation. So there are two kinds, the strategic and tactical, and at the strategic level, you are about to find the problems you are solving, your core problem space, which is a core domain. Domain is a problem space. And then this core part is the thing which makes the most money for your company. Around this, you have a couple of supporting subdomains. So these are also things needed to transfer your users into core domain where you earn a lot of money, but those parts are not as crucial as the core one. And then around this, there are even more helping domains, which are called sometimes generic subdomains. And here the perfect example would be the authentication mechanism. You usually don't write this on yourself, with your own workforces. You are just using a product by about something like Okta or Keycloak or whatever. For supporting domain, you rather write them, but it's not like as crucial in investing. And for core domain, this is the part when you should focus more battle-tested employees. You should make them working on this heavily, and this is something unique for your business. Then, as I said, domain is a problem space. So on top of the problem, we build a solution. Having this differentiation between various domains, we can then come with various solutions, various tools solving the issue. As I said, for authentication, we might just buy an existing tool. But there are also other things, and sometimes, even though we use similar terms in two parts of the system, we have similar, it would appear that it seems we have similar things to follow. It's still not the same thing. So this is when bounded context and ubiquitous language are handy. So you need to discover that these things, even it's named the same like the other thing, like product here, product there, but those are way different products. Yeah, here the product is in the context, as with Pix and with Elon and with my presentation. So Elon was providing Pix in the context of microchipping, and I'm providing Pix in the context of the fairy tale. There are also other contexts. Yeah, so assuming that our core domain is fairy tale or in general or various fairy tales, we might have two bounded contexts, one for Red Hood and the second one for the Three Little Pigs. In both fairy tales, you had same word called mother, but in the Red Hood, the purpose of mother was way different than in the Three Little Pigs. In the Three Little Pigs, sometimes there is even no reference to mother, and in the Red Hood, it was the starter of the application, like of the problem, of the solution. So mother was sending the Red Hood to the grandma. Then house. In both fairy tales, you have the same term called house, but even having same address, as a business identifier for house, for the Three Little Pigs, you are not looking at the same properties as you would look from the perspective of the Red Hood. So house could have the same business identifier in both bounded context, but in the Three Little Pigs, you would rather look at how this house was built. What is the source material of this house? While in the Red Hood, you would rather look at the location, where that this house is located at the end of the forest. So you need to travel there by foot for a couple of kilometers, for instance. So the same term, different bounded context, different properties, even if the identifier is the same. And the wolf is also different. In the Three Little Pigs, he was hoofed and puffed, and in the Red Hood, the wolf was smarter, he was cheating, he was pretending, and yeah, you know the stuff. How to discover what are our domains, what are our business contexts we can put on top of the domains, what is the ubiquitous language? That's the good question, good you asked. The answer I can propose is something which caught attention, especially before pandemic restrictions. So event storming, that as a workshop for discovering tools, discovering domains, and you have to deal with. And regarding event storming, I will provide you some hints how to do this. There is a golden rule of event storming. We should, as the name tells, focus on events. Event is a verb in the past tense. And we shouldn't care as much about data structure. Event is something significant which happened to the system and changed its internal state. But we don't want to think as much in nouns in the state itself, rather in events. Then there are three kinds of event storming, I would say. Then there is big picture event storming to discover domains, to follow some simplified notion, to even sometimes find a vision for your company. This is when you go for domains. Then there is a process level event storming, so sometimes called process mapping or something like that. This is when you have this big picture, when you divide system into domains, you then proceed with bounded context. And then last but not least, for the particular bounded context, there is design level event storming, where you focus more on building blocks from tactical domain-driven design. In that part, the last part, you are also dividing between commands and queries part of the system. There are things which change the system state, which results in events, and there are queries which are just events visualization or the state visualization. So this is important differentiation. Here's how it can look like. This is big picture event storming. So we have just three different kind of cards, like orange ones and those I'm buttered colors, yeah, but pinkish ones, and those which are rotated. So the rotated ones are problems. Here there was a strong discussion between all the participants in the session. Orange one are the events themselves, and then you have also some aggregates or maybe actors of this which are executing or involved in these particular events. What are the problems? As I said, it was popular, especially before pandemic restrictions, because during the restrictions, you had some problems with doing this. In order to run this session properly, you should do this offline with all hands on deck, all the participants in the same room. You should prepare. You should literally involve sometimes even very key people of the company in that sessions. And it's hard to run this without an isolation. You should isolate yourself from the external world. You might even spend 2 days for that. So statistics is the crucial for that. Because of that, there are also some other ways of discovering your domains, your bounded context. The original one from domain-driven design is called modeling whirlpool. So this is like iterative way where you are discussing with some business domain matter experts, and you are providing them some concrete scenarios. They are telling you that in this scenario you should rather use these terms, you should rather you didn't understand it correctly, you should rather rotate, you should iterate on that. You are doing this a couple of times, and then you are creating a model in the code. The model also opens your eyes for some problems, so you are updating your scenario. You are also you are yet another time talking with your business experts and so on and so forth. And this is how it works in more like traditional way, and some kind of hybrid way is also what we do for URL service from my team, as we were using Miro, and we are using event storming notation, so we are having all the cards in the proper colors, but we are doing this offline. We are not doing this offline, we are doing this online asynchronously, and so on and so forth. So it's not full event storming, it's not full modeling whirlpool, some kind of hybrid approach people are taking. Then we can move toward tactical domain-driven design, and here I would like to provide you what are the building blocks of DDD and what are the important information regarding each building block. So the main one, I would say, is the entity, which contains an identifier, which is a business identifier. For a person, it would be a personal number, some kind of this. For the credit card, it would be card number, for instance. For the aggregate being invoice, it would be an invoice number. What that entity should have, this is, as I said, business identifier, and its identity is strictly connected with this identifier. So the same invoice number means this is the same entity. You shouldn't override your equals method in Java. You can just follow this simple identifier as the source of comparison. So entity contains identifier hidden. All the fields are hidden. What it exposes are the business methods which are providing you the API. For the invoice, it would be, I don't know, pay the invoice or issue the invoice. For the credit card, it would be withdraw, and so on and so forth. So the business operations, which are also available in your business language, this is the language various domain experts use when they talk with each other. Then I would say the specific version of aggregate of entity is an aggregate. So this is the main root for all the various entities. So I would say the invoice from the previous example is even the aggregate, and each invoice position is an internal entity toward aggregate. Aggregate hides some entities inside, and it also exposes business method. It also has the business identifier and so on and so forth. For aggregate, for acting with aggregate, we should have repository which contains just two basic methods, which is for saving aggregate and finding it by the unique business identifier. Then you might have some logic, which is the computation logic. It also contains your business terms. It also contains your business rules to follow. Rules which also have some invariants, some specific ways your business operates, encapsulated in the method body. Yeah, but as I said, aggregate with repository is stateful. You can save it, and there is also a service in the domain which is stateless. So for instance, for the couple of invoices, you might have a domain service called bookkeeper who is calculating your taxes based on a couple of aggregates. Yeah, this is stateless logic, but anytime you execute this calculation on the service method on the same invoices, you are getting the same results. And it also contains rules you need to follow. For some rules which are parameterized, you might also think of input parameters being value objects. You might also think of some other building blocks like specification and policy. Specification is object-oriented if, and if condition, if statement, and policy is the strategy design pattern. Value object is something helping in all that, as well as event. So the value object is here for exposing actual data structures in a way different than entities. For entity, the crucial part was the identifier. That was the only thing responsible for the identity of the entity. And for the value objects, identity depends on the data structure, so on the actual things inside the value object. Let me give you an example. 2 coins, 1 PLN each is equal to 1 coin, 2 PLN. Yeah, so coin is the perfect example of a value object. And then I also like to write my domain-oriented code in some cheating way. I'm adding the memento design pattern, which is the snapshot. So each entity, even though I'm not exposing its internal state anyhow in the getters itself, I'm having sometimes a snapshot, which is like a Röntgen X-ray photo of the entity with internals as well. And this snapshot may help you with some visualization, with saving in the database, implementing the actual repository, and so on and so forth. So these are the building blocks, and we can convert them into a code by creating some set of helper interfaces. And this can help us, for instance, going through the future implementation. So domain entity, as I said, it has a business identifier, and I like it to provide me the snapshot. So each my entity and each my aggregate have a method like get snapshot, which returns something. What is the snapshot under the hood? For now, it just contains the ID information. Then aggregate as the specific entity, which also has identifier, also is able to generate snapshot, and so on and so forth. There is a repository which accepts just aggregates. So this kind of contract helps me then following these patterns I referred to in the previous slide. Let me drink a bit. And let's move on. With all that theory, let's take a look at the Three Little Pigs example. The question which should be asked is, what is the aggregate for this particular domain? And in order to understand this question, let's remind ourselves what was the business logic inside the Three Little Pigs. What are the invariants? What are the rules to follow? What is the business physics in our domain? There is a way of building a house. You can build from straw, from wood, from bricks. Then each time wolf is blowing the house down, the pig living in the house is escaping to the neighbor. Then we have a rule that wolf is resigning after 2 failures of blowing. Yeah, he failed 2 times, so it's enough for him. He's leaving. And at the end of the day, pigs should learn from the mistakes and improve. So if originally I built a straw house, after this adventure, I should never build a house from straw. So that's the way. What we skip, as this is first of all MVP, and second of all, this is the fairy tale, so we can skip whatever we want. There are plenty of versions of this fairy tale. I was surprised preparing this domain, these business requirements, that there are so many versions of the fairy tale. So let me skip Mother of the Pigs. Let me skip the part when wolf is climbing through the chimney. And when, in some versions, the brutal ones, there was even wolf eating the pigs. So let's skip them. So what should be the aggregate? Either should be pig, lazy, or rather hardworking, maybe wolf, maybe house. What's your guess? Maybe you can type on chat what you think. No responses yet. Am I still hearable?
Yeah, I think that chat is disabled, so will try to enable. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's enabled. It's enabled. Okay.
There are some ideas. There is an idea of house. Well, here's the thing. Whenever you picked up, you should stop right here, right now, because what we were talking about is that we should focus on the events. We should focus on the actual things modifying our internal system state. So here is how you can provide the events. And this is actually the simulation of the big picture event storming I made with myself. So brainstorming with myself, right? But it helped me a bit, because originally I thought that it would be kind of natural to have a pig and a method like pig build house or something like this. Yeah. And after having this session, I provided some cards with past tense, with nouns, not with nouns, but verbs in past tense. And then I sorted them in the order. I read through the reverse timeline and so on and so forth, all the techniques for the big picture image storming. And then it started to click in my head. Hey, I see this. I know what should be the aggregate. It shouldn't be a pig, probably, as I originally thought. Then here we have the simple case, like there is a single domain, so the single problem space. So we don't need to do this mapping of the process mapping and so on. We just can skip to the design level event storming. And then it appeared even more visible that there are 2 rules in the system we should encapsulate, and actually both should happen in the same aggregate, as the command, the blue card blowdown, relates then to the letting thing in. So there is the same aggregate which could handle both rules, encapsulated inside and exposed as business methods, with invariants handled as dedicated implementation details. So there are also actors, there are also some things like command and the responsible for and the resulting event. So these are the simple, usually the simple cases. If after session of event storming you have plenty of command event parts, it either means you did something wrong during the workshop, or it means that you are actually dealing with the CRUD system, so create, read, update, delete system, yeah, if you have many command event parts. Here, fortunately, I found 2 rules, and based on the rules, based on the comments, based on these details, I was convinced that the aggregate should be house, as it was also provided by Georgi and Alexander. This is domain-driven design. This is even domain-driven design kind of converted or applied for the 3 topics, but we also have a clean architecture part of the title of the presentation. So let me quickly go through this concept. Here is the best article I've ever seen about clean architecture. It is linked under the picture, obviously. And domain-driven design can be applied without a clean architecture, but these 2 things are perfectly matching each other. So in the center of our solution, domain should drive our solution. We should have the domain model, our domain services, and so on and so forth. Then we treat those services as our physics we can then use for building use cases, user scenarios. So we wrap this center with some application layers, with some command handlers, with some user scenarios, use cases, call it as you want. It can be even user stories, yeah? And then around user stories, we can plug our ports and adapters. There are 2 kinds of ports and adapters: driving one, which steers our application, and driven ones, which our application uses under the hood. In the example here, I would say, oh crap, I clicked, sorry, need to come back to slides. In this triangular form, I would say this is a single bounded context. So it encapsulates a couple of aggregates, it contains a couple of use cases, and it is connected with 1 or 2 adapters. Yeah, each use case can have different ones, different parts. So this triangle is a bounded context. Some bounded contexts can mix with each other at the application level, but domain should be isolated. And here we have, for instance, example of adapter, which is ORM, which is adapter on its own. So it also have a MySQL or SQLite or whatever you want. I missed 1 more adapter in this picture, a very important one, as you probably all have experience with, the Excel one. It's even matching the picture in the background. Like here we have some kind of port, and this is adapting the port. Yeah, here the same. Those are the hands around the central stone. Yeah, so these are the things in theory, but how to convert them in the code. This is just a proposal, 1 thing you can do in your app. You might divide your app into different modules, and each module contains a different code for various layers of the system, let's say. So domain is the first part, then there is an app module which just uses domain. So it's clear with that differentiation, with that introduction of additional modules, what is depending on what. I like this because of that especially. Then you have adapters part, and I'm not only using modules, but I'm also using Java packages to figure out what is going on. So there are some things regarding the application layer inside the module called app, but also in the package called app. And as you can see, there are even corresponding adapters in the same package, but in a different module called adapters. So I can also use a package private access in between the modules as well, no problem. Here I also see there is a model package inside the domain, and I see there is a corresponding model package inside adapters. So it's literally at the first sign I can say, okay, I'm pretty sure that model introduces, the domain introduces some port, and adapter is then implementing this port however it wants. Then I have 2 additional things like input adapters. So these are the driving ones. There is a console and REST I can use to steer in my application. And then there is the outer adapter, which is here in the example logging. There are also some database and things, but these, as you can expect, are inside the dedicated model or app packages. And then there is an ultimate adapter called monolith, which contains a couple of adapters from different domains. So here's the same thing, but in a different visualization. So all these three modules in the center is one bounded context. Domain relies on nothing almost. There's just shared kernel, some sample example interfaces as I was showing. Then app depends on the domain. Then adapters have dependency on both domain and app. And the monolith, the ultimate adapter, is depending just on adapters from bounded context. So this is a perfectly fine scenario, and you can use it if you like. I found some benefits of it. The one of the benefits is not only the responsibility separation, it's also that in each module I can use specific tools for my use cases. So in domain, I really like tests written with Spock, because this allows you to write some domain-specific language and make your tests really readable. Then for application layer, it might be better maybe to use Kotlin because it has some nice syntax sugar and is more precise than Java. And in adapters, this is the place when you start plugging all the frameworks. You don't need the frameworks anymore in the previous modules anyhow. Here you decide that you want to use Spring, or you want to use whatever is sketchy, Meteor or Quarkus or whatever. You decide you want flyway migrations, you decide you want this kind of relational database, you decide you want REST, and so on and so forth. And the monolith might, if you have multiple bounded contexts, multiple adapters from bounded contexts, at monolith level, you might also define some configuration, like maybe the concrete database is configured in one place, just in the monolith part, or the concrete events handling, other infrastructure things like events, database, as I said, is in the monolith, and the adapters from underlying bounded context are just plugging somehow into that what is configured in monolith. So I will show you this in the code in a second, but let me also tell you a little more about user story and command. So in Jira, when you create tasks, it's usually not task for your business. It's not this domain part, it's the application part. The business part is handled with domain modeling, with event storming, and so on. And user story is usually in the app layer. So these are the comments you want to issue against your domain. And your domain is like a core you build on top of. So here are the example user stories for the three little pigs. Like the most important ones are the green ones. As a pig, I want to build a house so that it fulfills my requirements. And as a wolf, I want to blow the pig's house down so that I can catch the pig. So we can use, thanks to that, our system as some kind of registry or some kind of documentation, storage, or whatever. In general, the truth is that just this first bullet point is the user story we want, but I wanted to make some more nicer example. And those crossed out are things you might think are happening in the system, but actually this is some kind of side effects. So when wolf blow house down, in fact, this pig is visiting the neighbor. Other than that, there is no use case for that. Same with the sharing knowledge. This is just the consequence of other user stories. Yeah. So let's dive into the code now. And as I said, I divided my presentation. I divided my code into three parts. There is a domain part, and there is a package called model here. And what it has, as we agreed, aggregate is the house itself. So what it has the business identifier. Here is just a house ID, but it also has some business operations exposed. I like this Java in the domain part because I see clearly that this part is published, this part is published, this is just package private, this is just package private. Yeah. So thanks to that, I see what I can execute, and I can treat all these published things as aggregate root. So we also have inside this house something which doesn't leak outside, which is the dedicated entity, which is pigs helper, which just stores three little pigs inside, and it also exposes methods on its own, like take cover or welcome. So there is a nice business language. This is this ubiquitous language, yeah. So I'm using the terms someone would use to refer to this domain. So someone would use the term like welcome another pig in the way of telling this fairy tale. Yeah, when telling this fairy tale, I would say that pigs welcome the other pig. Yeah, I would say also the pigs took cover. Yeah, I would say something like handle hurricane. Maybe I wouldn't say, because this is package private, and let's see where this package private is then used. So we also have some policies, we also have some specifications here. But what is nice is how Wolf ended in this bounded context. So Wolf became just a domain service which doesn't have any dependency on the repository or something. It just uses the aggregate, which is here the house, obviously, and it just gets the house. So Wolf service has a method blow down, and it takes house, which is a target of blowing. Yeah, so it's kind of natural. We also had this business requirement, that was the business requirement, which was telling me I want to retry blowing for 2 times. So I'm having try, target, handle, hurricane. And then if house appeared to be indestructible, I'm retrying. And then if I couldn't manage for the 2nd time, as a Wolf, I'm resigning from attacking. So here is the benefit of having this nice preparation of business discovery, domain discovery. I now use the same terms as the business person would use to refer to this fairy tale. So that's it. What we have here, the house can be built. There is a building policy, which is the way of choosing how to build the house. So if the pig is very lazy, it's also interesting, because pig ended up just as a simple enum. We had this requirement that pig should be either not lazy or lazy, and it should learn from the mistakes. So it is also reflected here. So very lazy pig can become not lazy anymore pig. Lazy pig can become not lazy anymore, and so on and so forth. So this is what make us reflecting the business logic, but also we are not introducing unneeded code. We are just introducing the things we really need, and we want to build our solution on top of. So the house factory is building for pig, and it uses the policy in order to specify what is the material to choose. Then the house is created, and then that's basically it. There are 2 ports from the domain, which is the house repository, which extends the domain repository I've shown previously, which is having just find by ID and save methods. And that's basically the only port which needs to be implemented. Then around domain, we have app. So all the use cases. So you remember, those were the user stories, like as a pig, I want something. As a wolf, I want something else. So let's see what we have, how we ended up with modeling this app layer. So we have commands we can execute. So there are 2 commands, build house, and there is also a update. Let me see it in that way. There is the 3 little pigs command, the base class. Then there is the build, and there is blow down command, which is build house and blow down corresponds to the green things written here. Then I'm having these 2 helper things. I'm not going to expose them through some driving adapters, but I still model them as comments. So there is an enter, so pig can enter the house, and then there is the share knowledge. What I'm having here, I decided to have my perfect API, the simplest also approach possible was taken. So build house needs just the owner, the pig for which we build the house. Then the update command is always happening in the context of house, and blow down, it doesn't need anything more actually. The enter needs the existing pigs or all the pigs which want to enter the house and the house ID. Yeah. Then sorry, I clicked. Then the share knowledge, it's needed just house ID. So those are the comments, and I came up, thanks to starting with domain, distilling the core from it, then building on top of the domain, I came up with just a set of minimum attributes I need to expose, very minimum set. I'm having then command handler. it's not like I created a little shortcut here, yeah? So it's not like there is, each command has a dedicated handler. There is just one, let's say, service which handles all the commands, but under the hood it goes from build house, it delegates to some things from the domain, yeah? This is how commands in the app, which is domain driven, should be handled. So they should coordinate, do some life cycle on the domain aggregates, but then delegate the whole process to the domain aggregates. So, and domain building blocks. So for house, I delegate the way of building to the house factory, and then I'm executing a method from the port, which is the repository. So I'm saving the house. Then for all the update command, I'm reading the house back, and then I'm doing something to handle the update command, which can be like blowing it out. So yeah, I know what to do. I just delegate the logic to the domain service. With enter, I delegate logic to the aggregate, because aggregate can let each pick in. Then for share knowledge, I'm just running a method on the aggregate itself. Yeah, so this is how it looks. It's all driven by the domain. But usually in our apps, we have a limited set of commands, but we also have plenty of visualization methods. So not only command part is important, but sometimes the query one as well. So here in the query, we can think of a totally different set of attributes, totally different set of things. We might here query more tables than just our aggregate ones. We might, for instance, add an additional bounded context here, like not even a bounded context. There might be a table which stores the house itself for the aggregate purposes, but there can be a helper like house, I don't know, painting table, which tells what are the colors of each walls, yeah, and whatever. And in the query part, I might join between these two tables, but in the command part, I just need the things for the aggregate. So here I have more freedom. I can I can add additional read models. I can add more things for the reading part. Here, actually, I added just the information whether the house is destroyed or not. I'm not having any dependencies. This is also just the port. I'm not having any dependencies on Flyway or any jog, Spring Data, Hibernate, whatever. I'm just introducing the port from this layer. And then there is also event handler, because some things are handled like this wolf resigned from attacking. It executes an additional command and so on and so forth. Then there is the adapters part, which adapts the ports to actual implementation. So let me start with the app. Obviously, we have the implementation. Here is the actual entity. Here is the actual repository. So I'm using here actually the Spring Data JDBC project with its mapping possibilities and to implement these methods actually. Yeah, so Spring, I can write repository, I can do custom queries, I can generate some queries from the method signature, but this is the part we all know and we all used to. What is not in the app, but in the model, what is interesting, here I gave a try to execute some events with that way of executing events. So aggregate, the house can also contain events. This is a totally different layer. Here I'm in the house entity. House entity is actually the way of storing the house. It is built from the snapshot. And as you remember, the snapshot is the memento pattern I'm having for getting some things from the aggregate. Otherwise, I couldn't get. So the house, after executing some methods, it stores underlying events. So for instance, after this handle hurricane, if the house was destroyed, so we are telling that the house was abandoned. And this is the event. We then expect other layers of our system, actually the app layer usually, to publish. Yeah. So this is the event. Sometimes there are domain events like in the service. This is actually the domain service itself exposing some event publishing way of doing. But for the house, it is done in the experimental way. That house is exposing the array list. Then these events to publish are then passed through the snapshot. Where is the snapshot part? There it is. Yeah, I'm getting these events. And then through the snapshot, I'm going to the actual persistence layer and actual implementation, which is this house entity, which actually also handles the publishing with this nice features of Spring, but this is just a demo application, so I could use them. Otherwise, I would use Kafka or something. Yeah. So this is the model, and we have also the input adapters, which are, for instance, REST and console things. What is nice here, one more thing. So I didn't have any even JSON annotation in my domain and app. I'm just adding them here in the abstract class, and then there is somewhere later there is a way of adding these abstract classes containing just getters and mixing them with the actual classes of like house read model. Here, no annotation, house read model JSON, annotation like JSON include non-empty, and this is then handled gracefully by underlying object mapper, then in the way that we are not serializing empty fields on the house read model. So this is like that. It's kinda a show off because I wanted to really have a clean model part, clean app part, and just put everything literally connected with some mappings and stuff inside the adapters, but it's not a must, it's just a demo. Yeah. Let's see it in action. So I started the application, and then there's a way I can start the servlet mode. So it started, and let's execute some commands through our input adapter. So our input adapter can accept the post method on the houses. We are sending the owner very lazy, and the result is 201 created. So as we know, REST specification, there is a location header in 201, which tells me how to read the house. Here, when I'm reading, I will get the read model. So it appeared this house has ID of 4. It is built out of straw because the pig who owns this is very lazy. It's not yet destroyed. Then I can build another house, which is built maybe for not lazy pig. Why not? And this is also nice because starting from the domain, I created a minimum set of attributes needed for my comments, and then I expose these comments with some sort of REST controller. And thanks to that, I'm also having, as I see on myself, I'm designing my REST APIs better than in other way. When I'm starting from the API, it's usually worse. Here I'm creating very simple mappings. My create method accepts just this build house itself. So it expects just the owner of the house. Get mapping returns this house read model. Then there are these other mappings, which doesn't need any serialization, any parameters actually. So we built now the house number 5. Let's see how it works. It is built out of bricks. And let's try to blow the 4th house, which gives us no content. So after reading this house, we now see it is destroyed and there is no information about pigs inside. But when I'm entering the next house, number 5, I see both pigs are there because pig escaped from destroyed house to the neighbor house. So this is how it works. Then Wolf can try to blow a house of bricks, but it obviously fails here. When I read this house once again, I see the pig, which used to be lazy, is not lazy anymore. That was the good lesson for her. And if you are paying enough attention to logs, you might see something already appeared. But let me show it differently. And in order to show it, I will go to application and mode of console. No, mode known. No web application. So this will start a different adapters. This is how I configured it to start this console fairy tale runner. So let's see what we got now. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs. Started application, process running. Everything as in fairy tale. The first little pig was very lazy. He didn't want to work at all, and he built his house out of straw. The second little pig was a little... dobra. Okay, let's skip it a little bit. Let's speed it up. So here we have the accumulation. The wolf followed, excited that he might get 2 little pigs. No, let's skip a little more. Here, little pigs, let me in, or I will hoof, and I will poof, and I will blow your house down. No, never, blah, blah. The wolf hoofed, and poofed, and hoofed, and poofed, but he could not blow the house down. The 3 little pigs never had any trouble from him again. They learned from their mistakes, and they all lived happily ever after. Shutdown initiated, shutdown completed. and they live long and happy after, right? How these logs are built? There are no logs in domain, there are no logs in app, which is actually not recommended way, but I wanted to try that approach here in the example app. All the logging happen in with aspect-oriented programming, so don't do this at home, but it was also possible to do in that way. And that's basically the code example, but it was a little over-engineered, I would say. It was heavily inspired by some things I'm watching here and there, but I recommend these two recordings, especially the left one, because it's in English. The right one, unfortunately, is not having an English version, and the author said that he won't never do this in English, probably, because he moved to another company. He's doing technical stuff more than business now. So yeah, so this is recommended when you are a Polish speaker. This is for all of you who understand English. This is very good. And this shows more pragmatic approach, I would say. The approach which is not dividing everything here into like a couple of modules and so on. Like here, I'm having 3 modules. I didn't get any annotations in my domain in app. It's like a little too much, maybe. I still use nice tests. So for instance, app is tested all nicely. There is no Spring Runner here, but in test, I have a dedicated application which is kind of simulating Spring. So I'm testing this all use cases with unit tests. It's nice, but still, I could do better. And this presentation on the left shows how to do this like full time in general. And I wanted to give you yet another example, just not to stay with so complex code structure. And this is the actual premiere. I made this code yesterday. So there is another domain in my system, another way of another fairy tale here in the background. And I can show, I called it more pragmatic approach. So the Red Hood is now just a single module, and it uses rather the packaging from Java, the packages, to actually hide the implementation details. So it uses much more package private access than the other one around. So here in the Red Hood, our aggregate is a wolf itself, himself, because wolf has state which changes once it's dressed as the grandma, once it's not. You know, you remember the Red Hood fairy tale. So it's way different wolf than stateless wolf in the Three Little Pigs. This wolf is stateful. It's stored in the database, and here this is the more pragmatic approach. So I put this mapping annotation inside the aggregate. I hope it won't kill me by doing this. Yeah, it shouldn't. Yeah, it's just service is published here. I clearly see this is the public API I should use outside. There is the controller part, which is in the dedicated sub package, and it is just using the public API from the underlying domain-like package. Yeah, so it's a kind of different approach. And in the real-life application, I would rather start like that. It's still good. It's still dividing you and makes you thinking in a more object-oriented way. When you start from business, then you go through use cases and expose them. It's still good enough when it comes to readability, and it's good enough when it comes to speed of development and benefits you get from this approach. So I'm not having it yet implemented fully. The logs are simplified comparing to the nice logs from the Three Little Pigs, but yeah, I can start the conversation with Wolf, and this actually creates Wolf who plan to eat grandma and then the Red Hood. Then each time we read Wolf, we see the Wolf was created with ID 4. So each time we read him, we see the list of already eaten people. So as Wolf just initially met the Red Hood, he didn't yet ate anyone, but as soon as we will put in the meetings, in the recent meeting, the person who was planned to be eaten by a wolf, this will result in the wolf having an eaten person as provided. Yeah, and then there is a method for killing the wolf, and as you know, this will free the people from wolf. So I also see it in logs. It's not as fancy as in the previous example, but yeah, good joke is good just once. So I didn't repeat everything. Yeah, the wolf met grandma. That was what he planned. So he ate grandma alive. The wolf met huntsman. That one was totally unexpected. He was about being killed. Wolf got his belly cut open, and grandpa jumped out. This is a more pragmatic approach. I recommend you to take a look at this. This is currently a different branch, not yet merged. I introduced just the pull request. I think draft pull request, because I still not yet finalized, but you can see it in the repo. So, ending it up, here are the 3 little pigs from the Disney fairy tale version. And as you can see, Disney was also doing some funny stuff. In the top right corner, we have a pig, but in a totally different bounded context. So this is yet another bounded context for the pigs. Here is the code. You can check also this Red Hood part of it. Here are the slides once again. What I also would like to do here in Glovo, so if you have any like open topics to discuss regarding architecture and so on, let's meet. Maybe we can try even the event storming session. I haven't run one in like 2 years because of pandemic restrictions, so we can retry this if you have all important people being together. I would also like to introduce some kind of architectural meetings in our Grove cluster, because I've heard other clusters are having them, so we can also think of this. Let me know if you would like the approach. And there is also a huge initiative which will start soon. Not only backend needs architectural improvements, sometimes it's also the front-end customer web part which needs them as well. So we will work on that soon, I hope, especially in Grove cluster, but also outside. So that's it. Thank you for attention, and feel free to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Mateusz. I'm taking this over. I just arrived from Rafa. Is there any question from the room? Come on, I know that they're having a lot of people. There must be questions for the 3 piglets.
Yeah, I think that we have one. I don't know if can you see it, Mateusz?
Let me
one from Lucas.
Yeah, I see. Could you elaborate the motivations for house to be an aggregate with pigs inside it? Could pigs be a separate aggregate? Yeah, so let me answer that. So my motivation came because of the event storming I ran, yeah, and it appeared that there are some rules I need to follow, and in order to match these rules, it was enough to have house as an aggregate, and pig didn't need any invariants to be hidden inside. Pig ended up as the simplest value object as it can get, yeah. So it ended up just as an enum, because what appeared to be enough to handle the whole domain was the pig being lazy or not lazy or very lazy. Yeah, that was really enough regarding pig. If we would have some more invariants regarding pig, I don't know, it could change its mind in more fancy way, like some rules to validate, and those rules are based on, I don't know, some previous examples, some policies, additional things. We would store probably pig as a separate thing in the database. I would still start with the internal entity, but in case it has so many rules, this is not an entity but a new aggregate, then yes, it should be a separate aggregate. But in order to put this pig inside the house, you wouldn't do like one aggregate passed to another aggregate. You would still pass it as some kind of value object, some kind of snapshot, or just maybe this information, this is pig lazy or not lazy, or maybe just pig identifier in case this pig is actual separate aggregate. Yeah? So I would do this like that. Yeah, I got confirmation. That makes sense. Thanks. There's another question. What benefits have you seen in testing by using clean architecture? So that's a perfect question. I didn't dive as much into the tests. So as I said, first of all, each part of the system could be tested separately, and I think, I'm pretty sure, I haven't measured it, but in my domain, not only I'm using Groovy for test, which is perfect for such use cases, I would say. It is very verbose, it is very readable. I would even provided maybe to the business people this test to figure out, and I would say they could even understand this. There is a chance for that because of grooviness and readability of this test. And I think the other thing, the other benefit is that the domain itself is covered. As I said, I haven't measured this, but I'm pretty sure it is covered like 100% with a unit test alone. Yeah, because here I don't care about input output. In the domain, I can test it in isolation perfectly. Yeah. Then at the app level, I should start testing it as a flow. Yeah. So there are two ways of doing this: either with using some kind of mocking, so I can check if the interaction occurred. So for command handler, I can check that at the end of the day it is that test. Yeah, I can check that at the end of the day it called repository save. Yeah, I can check that at the end of the day when there are no changes in the underlying object aggregate after executing some business operation, I can check that there were no integrations with this. So I have different set of tests. I can also test here by providing some nice input and output adapters, but just in memory ones. So these tests in application here, I think I covered most of the business-wise scenarios. I have this specific way of building the app. I'm using it then in the Spring configuration. Let me open the configuration. But yeah, here the 3pix app from the application is used, but at the application level, it doesn't yet have input and output, actual input and output implementation. So it is in tests, it's built purely with in-memory repositories, and still it gives me the way of testing the app in a way. The unit in my unit test is the whole app itself. Yeah, so I'm testing just through public APIs from the app. So I'm testing just through command handler and just through query repository, and it covers all the scenarios, user scenarios. And here I'm not even yet plugging any actual Spring. So this test is super fast. All the tests from domain are also super fast. And then finally, ultimately, in this adapters part, I'm also having some tests, but here I'm actually starting the full context. I'm trying using this actual Spring beans and so on. So it is slower. And it gives me an overview, but I cover every other things in previous modules. So it is actually super nice. It came naturally that I built a business testing pyramid in this scheme because the domain is tested fully with unit test. Then there are some integration tests, but not including Spring with in-memory repositories and so on, which runs for the app. And then there are a couple of integration tests I'm covering also in that other part. When it comes to the Red Hood, I put a different approach a little. This is approach closer to recommended by this folk here. So I'm also testing just through public APIs, but everything with the in-memory version. Yeah. So here in the Red Hood, there are tests related. These are also testing the full scenarios, but they build the whole context with in-memory implementations without even adding the Spring layer. So the benefit is the nice test coverage, dedicated tests for dedicated parts of the system, and naturally it became the testing pyramid. Let's say as according to all the books. Yeah. And when it comes to Red Hood, it was even nicer because I'm having just one more big test for these use cases and small tests for Wolf, which focus on more on corner cases, and this one is covering all the use cases, and it was also enough to test everything in detail. So that's basically the benefit.
Okay, perfect. I will stop the questions here. If anybody has more questions, ask Darling Mateusz. I think that he shared the contact details at the beginning of the presentation. Thank you very much, Mateusz. We are going to continue with the next talk.